The moon has watched every human generation, yet no generation has understood it in quite the same way. Its surface remained almost unchanged, while its meaning became a calendar, a guardian, an omen, and a warning. Across ancient cultures, 7 warnings appeared when its light vanished, reddened, or disturbed the expected order of the sky. They may reveal less about the moon than about something humanity has slowly lost. What were those 7 ancient warnings? And is the moon truly what we thought it was? Long before cities brightened the night, the moon was one of the few steady lights above the human world. It did not shine by making its own light. It reflected sunlight, changing its visible shape as it moved around Earth. To early humans, however, the physical explanation was hidden. What mattered first was experience. Some nights were dark. On others, a pale light spread across open ground, riverbanks, forests, and stone. The difference could influence how far people could see, how safely they could move, and how clearly they could recognize places after sunset. We cannot know exactly what every prehistoric community believed about the moon, because most of those lives left no written record. Archaeology can reveal tools, hearths, shelters, burials, and patterns of movement, but it rarely preserves private thoughts. Still, the night itself shaped human evolution. Our ancestors lived beneath skies that were far darker than those known to people today, and the changing brightness of the moon would have been difficult to ignore. A brighter night may have made travel easier in open landscapes, while also making people more visible to predators or rivals. A darker night may have offered concealment, but it also reduced the ability to see obstacles, animals, and other members of the group. The moon therefore belonged to no single emotion. It could make the world feel safer and more exposed at the same time. This quiet contradiction begins near the origins of our species, when survival depended on reading changes in the environment. Human eyes are not specialized for darkness, in the way the eyes of many nocturnal animals are. We can adapt to low light, but our night vision remains limited. Fire later gave people another source of light, warmth, and protection, yet fire illuminated only a small circle. Beyond that circle, moonlight could reveal the broader landscape. It might show the outline of a path, the edge of water, the movement of animals, or the shape of a distant hill. None of this means the moon controlled human behavior. It means its light became one of many environmental conditions that people learned to notice. Over many generations, noticing repeated changes was useful. The moon grew brighter, reached fullness, faded, and returned. Even without astronomy, the sequence was visible. It offered a rhythm that could be remembered and discussed. Later societies used lunar cycles in calendars, ceremonies, agriculture, and navigation, but the beginning was simpler. The sky changed, and people had to live beneath that change. Somewhere in the long history of humanity, the moon stopped being only a light and became a sign. That transformation did not happen at one moment, and it did not happen in the same way everywhere. Different groups developed different stories, rituals, and systems of meaning, yet they began with the same presence above them. The moon appeared large enough to command attention, close enough to seem connected to earthly events, and regular enough to create expectation. When something so regular seemed to change unexpectedly, the effect could be profound. An eclipse, a reddish colour, or an unusual position near the horizon might appear not merely beautiful but disruptive. The familiar light could suddenly look injured, threatened, or absent. For people whose earliest ancestors had survived by noticing danger before it arrived, an unexpected change in the sky could easily become a warning. The warning did not come from the moon itself. It arose from the human mind trying to protect the human body, the group, and the future. That distinction is essential. The moon was real, its phases were real, and eclipses were real, but the meanings placed upon them were human creations shaped by fear, memory, authority, and hope. Before the first written warning, before kings and priests claimed to interpret the sky, there was only a changing light above a changing landscape, and people learning that survival often began with attention. To say that the moon is not what we thought it was does not mean that it is artificial, hollow, hidden by governments, or controlled by unknown forces. Those claims are not supported by accepted evidence. The deeper truth is quieter. Human beings have repeatedly mistaken the meaning of the moon, because every age has looked at it through the limits of its own knowledge. For much of history, people did not separate observation from interpretation as sharply as modern science tries to do. A darkened moon could be seen accurately, yet explained through ideas about kings, gods, illness, war, or moral disorder. The sight was real. The conclusion often belonged to the culture watching it. This distinction matters because it shows how understanding changes. The moon itself did not need to transform. Human thought transformed around it. The same object could be a lamp, a calendar, a divine sign, a political warning, a destination, or a record of the early solar system. Each meaning arose from a different question. People living close to the rhythms of night asked when light would return. Farmers and priests asked how to organize months and ceremonies. Rulers asked whether unusual events threatened authority. Astronomers asked how motion could be predicted. Modern researchers ask what lunar rocks reveal about the formation of Earth and its neighboring world. None of these questions is meaningless, but they do not all produce the same kind of answer. Near the beginning of human history, the most important knowledge was often practical. A changing sky could affect movement, visibility, memory, and expectation. Our ancestors did not need a theory of reflected sunlight to notice that the moon followed a pattern. They needed only attention, repetition, and communication across generations. This ability to preserve patterns was one of the foundations of human culture, yet pattern recognition has a cost. The mind is built to connect events, especially when uncertainty is dangerous. If a strange moon appeared before a battle, a death, a storm, or a failed harvest, the two events could become linked in memory even when no physical connection existed. Once repeated in stories, such a link could feel stronger than the original observation. The moon then became more than an object in the sky. It became a surface onto which a society placed its fears. Science did not arrive by making the moon less mysterious in a single moment. Understanding grew through correction. Observers compared dates, positions, shadows, and recurring cycles. Mathematical models improved. Telescopes revealed mountains and craters where some traditions had imagined smooth perfection. Spacecraft later showed a dry, airless surface marked by immense stretches of time. Samples returned to Earth allowed researchers to study lunar material directly. These discoveries did not prove that ancient people were foolish. They showed that knowledge is always shaped by the tools available to a generation. Even modern knowledge remains incomplete. Scientists understand the moon far better than any ancient court or temple could, but questions remain about details of its formation, internal history, water deposits, and long interaction with Earth. Uncertainty, however, is not evidence for any claim we wish to place inside it. It is an invitation to measure more carefully. The title therefore points toward a history of revision, not a hidden revelation. What changed was not the moon's identity, but the human frame surrounding it. 7 ancient warnings will reveal 7 ways people tried to explain disruption in a familiar sky. That instinct once helped communities respond quickly to uncertain movement, unfamiliar sounds, and changing weather. Yet when directed toward distant celestial events, it could also create explanations that felt protective without being true, allowing fear to become tradition, and tradition to become an accepted map of reality. They will also reveal a more enduring habit inherited from our earliest beginnings. When the world becomes uncertain, the mind searches for intention before it searches for mechanism. There was never one ancient book that gathered 7 warnings about the moon and delivered them to humanity as a single message. The number 7 belongs to the structure of this journey, not to a lost universal code. What survives instead is a scattered record of human responses. Clay tablets from Mesopotamia, court chronicles from East Asia, religious stories from South Asia, historical accounts from the Mediterranean, painted manuscripts from Mesoamerica, protective customs around pregnancy, and descriptions of a moon turned red all preserve different ways of reacting when the familiar sky seemed disturbed. These traditions did not arise together, and they did not mean exactly the same thing. Some were tied to kingship. Some concerned war, ritual, family safety, or the order of time. Their value lies not in proving that the moon sent warnings, but in showing how people interpreted uncertainty before its physical causes were fully understood. The first humans who watched the night left no written explanations, so we should not place later beliefs directly into their minds. Yet the basic human problem was already present. A species that survived by noticing changes in tracks, weather, animal behavior, and the movements of other groups also carried that attention upward. Repeated patterns created trust. A broken pattern demanded explanation. When the moon darkened during an eclipse, changed color, or appeared at an unexpected moment within a local system of prediction, the event could feel larger than an ordinary change in light. It touched the calendar, the authority of rulers, the timing of journeys, and the emotional security of communities. Each warning examined later will therefore contain two layers. One layer is the event itself, such as an eclipse or a visible change in color. The other is the meaning people placed upon it. Keeping those layers separate protects the story from becoming false. An eclipse is a predictable alignment involving the sun, earth, and moon. It does not announce the death of a ruler, cause military defeat, injure an unborn child, or signal moral judgment. Yet people have sincerely believed such things, and those beliefs sometimes influenced real decisions. A warning could change a ceremony, delay an army, increase the burden on an astronomer, or deepen fear inside a household. In that sense, an imagined cause could produce a real historical effect. This is one reason the moon is not what earlier generations thought it was. It did not carry the intentions they assigned to it, but the meaning still became part of human history. The 7 warnings also reveal that knowledge rarely replaces fear all at once. Calculation and myth can exist together. A society may predict an eclipse while still treating it as dangerous. An observer may understand a recurring cycle, yet continue to see political or sacred significance within it. Human beings do not abandon inherited meanings simply because a better measurement becomes available. Beliefs are carried through families, institutions, rituals, and language. They can remain long after the original conditions have changed. This pattern reaches back toward the beginning of human culture, when survival depended not only on what one person noticed, but on what a group remembered and taught. Shared memory made communities stronger, though it could preserve mistaken connections as easily as useful ones. The moon became an ideal vessel for such memory because it was visible to everyone, regular enough to measure, and distant enough to resist direct testing. Across generations, it gathered stories without speaking for itself. The 7 warnings ahead are therefore not secret messages hidden in the sky. They are records of 7 moments when human beings looked at a natural event and saw the condition of their world reflected within it. That need began in vulnerability, but over time it became a language through which civilizations organized uncertainty. The deeper question is not why the moon warned us, but why we so often needed it to. Before writing, clocks, or permanent cities, people could still recognize repetition. Day followed night, seasons altered plants and animal movements, and the moon changed its appearance in a sequence visible to anyone who watched the sky for long enough. It grew from a thin crescent toward fullness, then diminished until it became difficult to see before returning again. This pattern offered early communities a natural way to notice the passage of time, but the evidence must be handled carefully. Archaeologists have found objects marked with repeated lines, notches, and grouped symbols, and some researchers have proposed that certain examples may record lunar or seasonal cycles. Such interpretations remain debated because a series of marks can have many meanings. Without a written explanation from the maker, no one can know with certainty whether a particular object was a calendar, a tally, a decoration, or something else. What can be said more safely is that human beings were capable of remembering patterns, comparing nights, and sharing observations long before formal astronomy appeared. This ability grew from the same deep history that allowed our ancestors to follow tracks, anticipate migrations, recognize seasonal foods, and return to useful places. Time was not an abstract line. It was experienced through hunger, temperature, pregnancy, growth, decay, movement, and the return of familiar conditions. The moon gave that experience a visible rhythm above the landscape. A group did not need to know the moon's distance or orbit to say that a certain shape had returned, that many nights had passed, or that an expected season might be approaching. Later societies developed lunar months and combined them with solar observations, but the earliest stages were probably less exact and more local. Different communities would have watched from different climates and latitudes, where clouds, mountains, forests, and seasonal daylight changed what could be seen. A lunar rhythm useful in one place might have been less reliable in another. Even so, the sequence remained attractive because it could be observed without tools. The body itself may have reinforced this attention. People needed shared ways to coordinate travel, exchange, hunting, gathering, ceremonies, and social obligations. A repeated celestial cycle offered a common reference that did not belong to one person alone. When several people looked upward, they could compare the same changing light. This did not create a complete calendar immediately. It created the possibility of agreement. Over generations, agreement could become tradition, and tradition could become a system. The danger began when a useful pattern was treated as a force with intention. If the moon helped mark expected times, then an unusual appearance could seem like more than a visual event. It could feel as though time itself had been interrupted. That reaction connects the earliest human need for order with the later warnings preserved by civilizations. Our ancestors survived by expecting repeated conditions while remaining alert to change. The moon satisfied both instincts. It was regular enough to trust and variable enough to watch. Its phases were not true changes in its shape, but changing views of the portion illuminated by the Sunday. To people without that explanation, the cycle could resemble growth, decline, disappearance, and return. Those images later entered stories of death, renewal, fertility, authority, and fate. Yet beneath the stories remained a simple observation: the sky could help humans remember. The first lunar counting systems, whatever forms they took, were not evidence of hidden knowledge beyond nature. They were evidence of patient attention. A community looked upward, recognized recurrence, and used memory to connect one night with another. This was one of humanity's earliest intellectual strengths, not merely seeing a change, but preserving its order through language, gesture, careful teaching, and shared observation across more than one human lifetime. From that quiet act came calendars, records, predictions, and eventually the fear that if the celestial clock appeared to fail, something on Earth might fail with it. A lunar cycle could help people count time, but the light itself also changed what a night allowed. Before electric lamps, roads, and illuminated buildings, darkness placed a firm limit on movement. A bright moon did not turn night into day, yet it could reveal the edge of a path, the shape of a tree, the surface of water, or the movement of another person across open ground. For communities living near rivers, coasts, grasslands, or exposed hills, this difference may have influenced when people travelled, gathered, watched animals, or met beyond the immediate circle of a fire. Dense forests, clouds, mist, and steep terrain could weaken moonlight, while snow, sand, or pale stone could reflect it and make the landscape easier to read. Human activity therefore followed local conditions rather than one universal lunar rule. Some work could continue under a bright sky, especially tasks that required broad visibility rather than fine detail. People might repair tools, sort food, guard animals, prepare for travel, or remain socially active after sunset. Other work still depended on fire because moonlight was too dim for precision. A person who could see farther could also be seen from farther away. Predators, rivals, and prey responded to light in different ways, and human groups had to balance visibility with concealment. This tension reaches back toward the earliest human nights, when survival depended on judging whether movement was safer than stillness. The moon did not command those choices. It altered the conditions under which choices were made. Later societies placed ceremonies, festivals, offerings, and gatherings on particular lunar dates. Such practices were cultural systems, not proof that the moon exerted a hidden force on the mind. A full moon could make an outdoor gathering easier because people could see one another and move with less artificial light. A crescent could mark the opening of a month because it offered a visible sign shared across a community. Over time, practical timing and sacred meaning could merge. A night chosen for visibility might be remembered as holy, fortunate, or dangerous. Ritual then gave emotional weight to a pattern that began in observation. Sleep presents a more difficult question. Moonlight, entering an unsheltered or lightly sheltered sleeping place, could make rest less dark, and light is known to influence human sleep timing. Yet this does not justify claims that the full moon controls everyone's sleep, mood, fertility, violence, or mental state. Modern studies on lunar phases and sleep have produced mixed results, and many popular beliefs go beyond what evidence can support. The safest conclusion is modest. Natural light at night can affect experience, but the moon does not act as a universal biological switch. Human bodies respond to light, routine, age, health, environment, and social habits together. The same caution applies to hunting and fishing traditions. Some communities develop detailed knowledge of tides, animal behavior, and night visibility, but these practices depended on place, season, species, and experience. They were not expressions of one timeless lunar law. What mattered was repeated attention. Near the beginning of human culture, people survived by noticing when conditions returned and when they did not. A brighter night, a rising tide, an animal's movement, or a seasonal change could become part of shared memory. The moon helped organize that memory because it was visible above many activities. It accompanied labor, travel, ceremony, conversation, danger, and rest without causing all of them. This difference between accompanying an event and producing it would become difficult to preserve. When important actions repeatedly occurred under a certain phase, the phase could seem responsible for their success or failure. From there, the moon could move from clock to influence, and from influence to warning. The ancient fear was not born from ignorance alone. It grew from a reasonable human habit carried too far, observing a pattern, trusting it, and then assuming that the pattern intended something meaningful. Once people trusted the moon as a repeated marker of time, any interruption could feel larger than a change in light. The phases themselves followed a familiar sequence, but an eclipse did not resemble an ordinary phase. During a lunar eclipse, Earth moves between the sun and the moon, and Earth's shadow crosses the lunar surface. To an observer without this explanation, the event could look as though the moon were being covered, wounded, swallowed, or removed from the sky. The change was temporary, yet its timing was difficult to understand without long observation and calculation. A community might know that the moon regularly grew dark near the end of a cycle, but an eclipse could darken it while it was otherwise full. The celestial clock appeared to contradict itself. That contradiction touched something older than formal astronomy. Human survival had always depended on distinguishing expected change from unexpected danger. The return of rain, migrating animals, edible plants, and seasonal cold could be remembered and prepared for. A sudden silence, an unfamiliar track, or a missing landmark demanded caution. When this way of thinking was turned toward the sky, an unusual moon could be treated as evidence that normal order had failed. The event did not need to cause immediate harm. Its power came from uncertainty. People knew what they were seeing, but not why it was happening or what would follow. Different societies answered that uncertainty through the ideas already available to them. Some connected celestial disorder with rulers because political authority was expected to preserve harmony. Others associated it with divine anger, warfare, illness, failed harvests, or danger to families. These meanings were not produced by the eclipse itself. They were shaped by institutions, stories, and memories on Earth. Even so, they could influence behavior. Priests might perform rituals, officials might consult records, armies might delay movement, and households might adopt protective customs. A physical shadow in space could therefore create real consequences through human interpretation. This pattern began with the same ability that had helped earlier humans survive, the ability to notice that something was different. The mistake came later, when difference was treated as intention. The moon seemed too regular to change without a reason, and human minds often prefer a purposeful cause to an impersonal mechanism. A warning feels easier to act upon than an alignment of distant bodies. It gives uncertainty a direction, even when that direction is false. Over time, careful observers discovered that eclipses also belonged to patterns. They compared records, recognized recurring intervals, and learned that disturbance in the sky could itself be predicted. This did not immediately remove fear. Prediction and omen could exist together. A court astronomer might calculate that an eclipse was possible, while a ruler still feared what it meant. Knowledge often changes in layers, leaving older meanings beneath newer methods. The moon therefore became both clock and test. When it behaved as expected, it confirmed order. When it seemed to break expectation, it exposed how much a society depended on the sky for reassurance. The 7 warnings that follow grew from this dependence. They were not messages sent by a conscious moon, but responses created by communities trying to protect power, time, bodies, and the future. This was not because ancient observers lacked intelligence. They worked with repeated experience, inherited language, and limited instruments. Their records would eventually support more accurate astronomy, but the same records first served societies in which the sky, government, religion, and collective safety were connected. The first written examples lead toward Mesopotamia, where observers preserved celestial events on clay and linked them to the fate of kingdoms. There, the darkening of the moon would become more than a strange night. It would become a question of whether a king could remain alive, whether a city could remain secure, and whether the order above had begun to turn against the order below. Between the Tigris and Euphrates, communities learned to live with a landscape that could be generous and uncertain at the same time. Rivers supported fields, transport, and growing cities, yet their changing waters could also threaten homes and harvests. In this environment, careful attention was valuable. People watched soil, weather, animals, rivers, and the sky, searching for patterns that might help them prepare for what came next. The moon was especially useful because its changing appearance could be followed across many nights. By the time writing developed in Mesopotamia, observation no longer depended only on spoken memory. Scribes could press signs into wet clay, allowing records to remain after the observer had died. Some surviving tablets contain lunar observations, eclipse omens, calculations, and reports connected with royal courts. These records come from different centuries and places, so they should not be treated as one unchanging tradition. Babylonian and Assyrian scholarship developed over long periods, drawing together temple learning, court service, inherited lists, and continued observation. The people who studied the sky were not modern scientists, but neither were they simply inventing stories without looking. They compared events, preserved earlier interpretations, and tried to relate what appeared above to what later happened on Earth. Their work joined accurate attention with assumptions that modern astronomy no longer accepts. A scholar might carefully note when the moon rose, which portion darkened, how long an eclipse lasted, or what stars stood nearby, then connect those details with the fate of a land or ruler. The observation could be precise even when the claimed meaning was not physically real. This mixture is important because it shows how knowledge often begins. Long before writing, human groups survived by remembering associations between signs and consequences. Dark clouds might precede rain, tracks might reveal an animal nearby, a certain season might bring food or cold. In Mesopotamian scholarly culture, that ancient habit of association became organized on clay. The sky was read as though it contained signs placed within an ordered world. Celestial events were not usually separated from politics, religion, agriculture, and collective safety. The moon belonged to a larger system in which disturbances could be interpreted as warnings for particular regions, rulers, or enemies. This did not mean every eclipse produced one identical prediction. Meaning could depend on timing, direction, duration, color, and the part of the lunar surface affected. Older examples were copied and arranged, while scholars also sent reports and advice to kings. Their authority rested partly on inherited learning and partly on their ability to observe carefully. For the court, the sky offered both reassurance and danger. Regular motion suggested order. A darkened moon suggested that something within that order required attention. Yet the tablets also reveal a quieter development. By preserving observations across generations, Mesopotamian scholars created the conditions for recognizing longer patterns that no single lifetime could easily confirm. Repetition could be compared rather than merely remembered. Prediction gradually became more capable, although omen interpretation did not disappear when calculation improved. The two could exist beside each other because they answered different needs. Calculation asked when an event might occur. Divination asked what the event meant for human affairs. The first question moved toward astronomy. The second protected an older desire to find intention inside uncertainty. Near the beginning of our species, that desire may have helped people react quickly to possible danger, but written institutions gave it new power. A fear once shared around a fire could now enter archives, temples, and palaces. What had once been a changing light over small mobile groups was now observed by specialists whose interpretations could reach the ruler. The moon had become an instrument of memory, authority, and anxiety, even though it remained physically indifferent. Under the moon of Mesopotamia, human attention became a durable system, and the night sky became part of the machinery through which kingdoms tried to understand their future. In Mesopotamian omen traditions, a lunar eclipse could become a direct threat to royal power. The danger did not come from any physical force leaving the moon and reaching the palace. It came from a system of interpretation in which the sky was believed to reflect the condition of the kingdom. A ruler stood at the center of political and religious order, so an unusual event above could be read as a disturbance aimed at the person expected to protect that order. Surviving tablets show that scholars considered many details before giving an interpretation. They noted when the eclipse began, how long it lasted, which side of the moon darkened first, what month it occurred in, and which region of the sky was involved. Different combinations could be connected with danger to different lands, cities, enemies, or rulers. These rules were inherited, copied, compared, and sometimes adjusted across generations. They reveal disciplined observation, but they do not prove that celestial events controlled human affairs. The eclipse was real. The predicted political meaning was a cultural conclusion. For a king, however, the distinction may not have felt secure. Royal authority depended on stability, and uncertainty could be dangerous even before any enemy acted. If court scholars announced that an eclipse pointed toward the death of a ruler, the warning could affect decisions, ceremonies, and the emotional atmosphere around the throne. The king might increase offerings, seek purification, consult additional experts, or change his public behavior. Those responses show how belief can produce consequences without the original omen possessing any physical power. The moon did not need to cause a crisis. The interpretation itself could become an element within one. This pattern reaches back toward the earliest human habit of treating unusual change as a possible signal. A movement in grass, a sudden silence, or an unfamiliar footprint might indicate real danger nearby. In such settings, assuming caution could protect life. But when the same habit was applied to distant objects in the sky, intention could be imagined where only natural motion existed. Mesopotamian scholars did not simply panic at every eclipse. They worked inside a learned tradition that tried to make uncertainty manageable. By classifying signs, they turned a frightening event into something that could be read, discussed, and answered through ritual. The system gave the court a sense that danger had form and that action was possible. It also strengthened the position of specialists who could interpret what ordinary observers could see but not decode. Over time, eclipse knowledge became increasingly capable of recognizing patterns and anticipating when such events might occur. Yet prediction did not automatically erase the omen. A danger could be expected and still be feared. In this world, knowing when the moon would darken and knowing what the darkness meant were separate questions, and the second remained tied to kingship. The first ancient warning therefore concerned more than the life of one man. It expressed anxiety about continuity. If the ruler died, the dynasty might weaken, succession might become violent, enemies might advance, and communities might face disruption. The king's body symbolized the body of the state. A shadow crossing the moon could be interpreted as a shadow crossing that body. Modern astronomy explains the eclipse through alignment and shadow, leaving no evidence that it selects rulers or predicts their deaths. Still, the tablets preserve an important truth about human history. When institutions fear collapse, they often search for signs before collapse becomes visible. The warning placed in the moon was created on Earth, inside a society trying to protect order from an uncertain future. In that setting, a rare darkness became politically meaningful because power was fragile. The heavens seemed permanent, while rulers were mortal. Linking the two allowed a court to imagine that mortality had announced itself in advance. It was an attempt to turn helplessness into preparation, even when the connection rested on belief. When an eclipse was interpreted as a threat to the king, Mesopotamian courts sometimes responded with a ritual now described as the substitute king practice. The basic idea was simple, though the ceremony could be complex. If the omen appeared to target the ruler, another person could temporarily take the royal position and receive the danger in his place. The true king withdrew from public identity, avoided ordinary royal signs, and waited while priests and scholars watched for the period of danger to pass. The substitute wore royal clothing, received a title, and occupied a symbolic position close enough to attract the predicted fate. This was not a common game or a theatrical performance. It belonged to a serious system of belief in which names, clothing, ritual roles, and celestial signs could redirect danger. Surviving texts suggest that the chosen person was often someone considered socially expendable, though individual cases and procedures varied. The ritual therefore reveals the unequal structure beneath the fear. Protecting one life at the center of power could place another life in danger. In some recorded traditions, the substitute and a woman presented as his queen were later killed, allowing the court to declare that the omen had been fulfilled without taking the real king. Modern readers should not assume that every eclipse led to this response, or that the practice remained identical across all periods. Evidence comes from particular royal archives and scholarly texts, especially from Assyrian and Babylonian settings. What matters is the logic. If the sky seemed to announce a death, the court tried to control whose death would satisfy the announcement. The moon itself caused none of this. Earth's shadow crossed the lunar surface according to predictable motion, while decisions made below transformed that shadow into a threat for a human body. This contrast brings the story back toward the oldest layers of human survival. Our ancestors learned that danger could sometimes be diverted. A predator might be distracted, a route abandoned, a shelter changed, or a vulnerable member protected. Such practical responses dealt with causes that existed in the surrounding environment. The substitute king ritual carried the same desire for protection into a symbolic world, where changing a role was believed to change the target of the heavens. It offered the court a feeling of action when the actual event was far beyond human control. It also protected authority by making the king's survival appear to confirm the success of learned advisors and ritual specialists. If the ruler lived, the ceremony could be remembered as effective. If political trouble followed, scholars could search for another sign, an error in timing, or an incomplete response. Systems of belief can become durable when every outcome can be absorbed into their explanation. The ceremony also shows that prediction could serve administration as much as religion. Reports moved between observers and palace officials, instructions were issued, and time was carefully counted. Fear became organized labor. A strange night became documents, duties, and decisions reaching far beyond those who first watched it. Yet the ritual was not meaningless simply because its celestial logic was false. It reveals how deeply political order depended on the body of the ruler, and how far a society might go to preserve continuity. The first ancient warning was therefore not that the moon truly desired the death of a king. It was that a kingdom afraid of losing its center could turn a natural shadow into a human sacrifice. Behind the clay tablets, calculations, garments, and ceremonies stood a colder truth about power. The heavens were treated as a court above the court, but those with the least power on earth could be made to pay for what the powerful feared in the sky. The moon remained silent throughout, reflecting sunlight as it always had, while people created danger, transferred identity, and called survival proof that the warning had been answered. In ancient China, the moon was observed within a political world that treated order in the sky and order on earth as closely connected. This idea did not remain identical across every dynasty, region, or school of thought, yet it shaped the way many courts understood unusual celestial events. The ruler was expected to maintain harmony through correct ritual, responsible government, and attention to the welfare of the people. When the heavens appeared irregular, officials could interpret the disturbance as a sign that human government required examination. The moon therefore became more than a source of light or a marker of months. It entered a language of responsibility. An eclipse could be recorded as a natural event and still be given political meaning. Court astronomers watched the sky, kept calendars, noted unusual appearances, and reported them to the throne. Their work demanded careful observation because the calendar affected ceremonies, agriculture, administration, and public order. A mistake in timing could be treated as more than a technical failure. It might suggest that the court had lost alignment with the rhythms it claimed to understand, yet it would be wrong to imagine that all people responded to every eclipse in the same way. Chinese intellectual traditions were diverse, and explanations changed over long periods. Some accounts used images of a celestial body being attacked or consumed. Others placed greater emphasis on calculation, regular cycles, and the duties of officials. Myth, ritual, mathematics, and political advice could coexist without forming a single simple system. This complexity reflects an ancient human habit that began long before states existed. Early communities survived by connecting environmental changes with possible consequences. When a river rose, animals moved, or weather shifted, attention could protect the group. In an imperial court, the same search for meaningful change was extended toward the sky and placed inside institutions. A darkened moon could be treated as evidence that something in the human world had fallen out of balance, even though the physical cause was only Earth's shadow crossing the lunar surface. The interpretation gave the event moral direction. Instead of remaining a distant alignment, it became a question addressed to the ruler. Had taxes become too heavy? Had officials failed in their duties? Had ritual been neglected? Had suffering among the population been ignored? These questions did not prove that the moon judged government, but they could create pressure for reflection, reform, ceremony, or public response. Celestial signs, therefore, had a double role. They could strengthen imperial authority by presenting the ruler as the center of cosmic order, yet they could also limit that authority by suggesting that poor rule had consequences visible above everyone. The sky could not easily be controlled by a palace. An eclipse seen by many people might force the court to explain an event it could not prevent. Accurate prediction offered one form of control. Because an expected eclipse was less disruptive than an unexplained one, records accumulated across generations, allowing observers to compare cycles and improve forecasts. Still, prediction did not always remove symbolic meaning. A known event could remain politically serious because knowledge of its timing did not answer what society believed it represented. For ordinary observers, however, the experience may have remained immediate. A familiar light weakened, the night changed, and public rituals signaled concern. Whatever thoughts arose are mostly unrecoverable, so surviving court records should never be mistaken for the voice of an entire population. The second ancient warning begins here, not with a claim that heaven truly watched an emperor, but with the recognition that governments often place their fears and duties inside larger patterns. The moon became a silent measure against which rulers could be praised, corrected, or condemned. Its shadow carried no moral judgment of its own. Human institutions supplied that judgment, turning a temporary darkness into a reminder that power was expected to answer to an order beyond itself. When the moon darkened during an eclipse, some Chinese traditions described it through the image of being eaten, attacked, or seized by a creature. The image was vivid because it turned a gradual loss of light into an event with an agent. A familiar object did not merely fade. Something appeared to be doing something to it. Stories involving a dragon or other devouring force helped people describe an experience that seemed sudden, public, and difficult to explain. Such accounts should not be treated as a single belief held by every person across all periods of Chinese history. They belong to changing layers of folklore, ritual, court practice, and local custom. At the same time, the language of being eaten captured what observers could actually see. A curved darkness moved across the moon, reducing its brightness until the surface appeared altered or nearly gone. Without knowledge of orbital geometry, the shape could resemble a bite spreading slowly across a round body. The physical cause, however, was Earth standing between the sun and the moon, causing Earth's shadow to fall across the lunar surface. No creature was present, and no force was consuming the moon. Yet symbolic language made the event easier to remember and easier to answer through action. In some communities, people made noise with drums, bells, shouting, or striking objects, believing that sound might frighten away the attacking being or help restore the light. The details varied, and surviving records do not allow every custom to be dated or located with certainty. What remains clear is the underlying response. When the sky seemed threatened, people acted together. Noise transformed helpless watching into collective effort. It gave the body something to do while the light changed beyond human reach. That impulse reaches back toward the earliest human need to respond when danger approached the group. A cry could warn others. Loud sound could intimidate an animal or draw people together. During an eclipse, the threat was only imagined. but the response used familiar tools of survival. The entire community could hear that it was not facing darkness alone. Ritual action also supported social order. Court officials might observe and record the event, while public practices expressed concern in a more immediate form. These responses could exist beside increasingly accurate astronomical knowledge. Chinese observers developed methods for tracking celestial cycles and understood over time that eclipses followed regular conditions. Better calculation did not automatically erase stories of attack. Human beings often keep an old image after its literal explanation has weakened, because the image still carries emotion, memory, and identity. Even today, people speak of sunrise, though they know Earth is rotating. Language preserves an earlier appearance without requiring a false scientific belief. The image of the moon being eaten worked in a similar way for some observers. It translated shadow into danger, then gave danger a recognizable form. The second warning was therefore not simply that a dragon might swallow the moon. Its deeper message was that disorder could approach the center of an ordered world. If the moon, a reliable marker of time and ritual, could be covered, then stability itself seemed vulnerable. The event reminded rulers and communities that expected patterns could be interrupted. Modern astronomy removes the creature from the explanation, but it does not remove the human fear beneath it. A temporary darkness still reveals how strongly people depend on regularity. The moon always returned because no one had rescued it from a monster. It returned because the alignment continued, the shadow moved, and reflected sunlight became visible again. Yet for those watching without that knowledge, the recovery could feel like proof that their noise, ritual, or obedience had worked. The lesson is important. A correct observation can support an incorrect explanation, and later expectation decides how evidence is remembered. In this way, natural repetition could strengthen a mistaken cause, preserving the warning across generations. The image of the moon being eaten belonged to the language of fear, but the court required something more durable than fear. It required records. Across long periods of Chinese history, officials responsible for calendars and celestial observation watched the sky, compared unusual events, and reported them to the ruler. Their duties change from dynasty to dynasty, and surviving sources do not describe one permanent institution. Even so, the central principle remained important. The heavens had to be observed carefully because the calendar supported ritual, agriculture, taxation, ceremony, and the public display of orderly government. A mistake in prediction could therefore become politically serious. It did not merely mean that a calculation had failed. It could suggest that the court had failed to maintain the knowledge expected of it. This placed unusual pressure on those who watched the sky. They were not free observers working outside power. Their records belonged to an administrative world in which information could protect authority, embarrass officials, or prompt ritual action. When an eclipse was expected, advanced knowledge allowed the court to prepare. When it was missed, the event could appear as both a celestial disturbance and a human failure. The moon did not punish inaccurate astronomers, yet the institution surrounding it could punish them. This distinction reveals how natural events become entangled with responsibility. The shadow crossing the moon followed physical laws, but the consequences on Earth depended on rank, duty, and interpretation. 9. Careful records also produced a quieter achievement. Observations preserved across generations made it possible to compare events separated by more than one lifetime. Patterns that seemed irregular to a single observer could become recognizable within an archive. This long memory helped improve calendars and eclipse prediction. The work did not begin with modern scientific assumptions, but it contained a method that science would later depend upon: observe, record, compare, and correct. The same human ability had existed far earlier, when small communities remembered seasonal changes, animal movements, and safe routes through a landscape. In the court, that inherited capacity became specialized labor. A person no longer needed to hold the entire pattern in memory. Written records could carry it forward, yet improved prediction did not automatically remove political meaning. An eclipse could be calculated and still treated as a warning. The court might know when the moon would darken while continuing to ask what the darkness demanded from the emperor. This coexistence was not a simple contradiction. Calculation answered how and when. Political cosmology answered why it mattered. The two systems could remain beside each other because they served different needs. One reduced uncertainty about timing. The other turned uncertainty into moral responsibility. The second ancient warning therefore reached beyond the image of a creature swallowing the moon. It warned that a ruler who claimed harmony with heaven also accepted the risk of being judged through the sky. Court astronomers stood between observation and authority, translating light, shadow, and motion into reports that could influence ceremony and policy. Their work helped create a remarkable historical record, but it also shows the burden created when knowledge serves power. A missed eclipse could threaten careers. A predicted eclipse could justify ritual concern. A natural event could become evidence in arguments about government. In this way, the eclipse became both an astronomical event and an administrative examination, testing not the emperor before nature, but the institutions surrounding his rule at court. None of this means the heavens truly evaluated an emperor. It means that people built a political mirror out of the sky and then looked into it for signs of order or failure. The moon reflected sunlight, while the court reflected its own anxieties back onto the moon. What appeared to be a warning from above was often a demand created below. Observe more carefully, govern more responsibly, and never assume that power can remain secure when the world no longer appears predictable. In the ancient traditions of South Asia, the darkening of the sun or moon was often described through images of obstruction, seizure, or attack. These images developed over many centuries, so they should not be compressed into one timeless story. An early Vedic hymn speaks of Svabhanu, a hostile being whose power covers the sun with darkness, while the sage Atri helps restore the hidden light. The passage concerns the sun rather than the moon, and its language belongs to a poetic and ritual world very different from later mythological narratives. Centuries afterwards, stories about Rahu became widely associated with eclipses of both the sun and the moon. In one well-known account, Rahu secretly drinks the nectar of immortality during the churning of the cosmic ocean. The deception is discovered, and his body is cut apart, but the immortal head survives. Rahu then pursues the sun and moon, swallowing them when he catches them, though they reappear because he has no complete body to hold them. This story gave temporary darkness a clear shape and motive. The light vanished because an enemy had reached it, and the light returned because the attack could not last. Yet it would be inaccurate to claim that every community, scholar, or period in India explained eclipses only through Rahu. South Asia contained many languages, regions, religious traditions, and systems of knowledge. Stories changed as they were retold, and local customs added different forms of protection: fasting, prayer, bathing, or avoidance. The names and details also shifted between textual traditions, temple practice, storytelling, and popular memory. A figure known in one source could gain new attributes in another, while artistic images gave the unseen obstruction a recognizable body. This layering matters because mythology is not a fixed scientific report. It is a form of cultural memory, preserving older ideas while adapting them to new audiences, rituals, and systems of belief. Some practices treated the eclipse as a period of impurity or danger, while others emphasized ritual renewal after the light returned. These responses belonged to culture and religion, not to the physical behavior of the moon. A lunar eclipse occurs when Earth passes between the sun and the moon, allowing Earth's shadow to cross the lunar surface. Nothing bites, poisons, or captures the moon. Still, the image of obstruction carried emotional power because it matched what observers saw. A dark edge moved across a bright circle, as though something invisible were taking possession of it. The mind naturally searches for an agent when a familiar pattern changes. That tendency reaches back toward the beginning of human survival, when movement in grass or sudden silence could indicate a nearby animal or rival. Assuming that something had caused a disturbance was often safer than ignoring it. In the sky, however, the same instinct could turn geometry into intention. Rahu became a name for the hidden cause that people could not see, giving cosmic uncertainty a face, a history, and a reason. The warning contained within the story was not merely that darkness would arrive. It suggested that order could be interrupted by forces that remained present even after defeat. The sun and moon returned, but Rahu continued to pursue them. Time therefore became a cycle of temporary safety rather than permanent victory. Such a pattern could help communities place a frightening event inside a larger narrative. What appeared chaotic was expected to end, and its ending confirmed the story. The eclipse passed because celestial bodies continued their motion, yet the return of light could be remembered as proof that ritual, divine protection, or cosmic order had prevailed. This is how a natural repetition can preserve a symbolic explanation. The image of cosmic obstruction does not reveal a secret property of the moon. It reveals how human beings transformed a shadow into a struggle, allowing fear to be named, remembered, and carried from one generation to another. Myth did not disappear when calculation became more precise. In South Asia, stories of Rahu could continue to shape ritual and memory while astronomers developed mathematical explanations for eclipses. These forms of knowledge did not always fight for the same place. The story answered what darkness meant inside a moral and cosmic world. A calculation asked when the darkness would occur and how long it might last. People could accept both without feeling that one had completely destroyed the other. This coexistence is important because the history of knowledge rarely moves from error to truth in one clean step. Older images remain in language, ceremonies, and family practice even after scholars describe the physical mechanism more accurately. Indian astronomers working in the early centuries of the Common Era inherited observations from earlier traditions and developed increasingly sophisticated methods for calculating the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. Among the best known was Aryabhatta, who explained eclipses through shadows rather than through a celestial being physically swallowing the light. A lunar eclipse occurred when the moon entered Earth's shadow. A solar eclipse occurred when the moon passed between Earth and the Sunday. These ideas placed the event within geometry, motion, and measurable time. They did not require an invisible attacker. Yet, mathematical astronomy belonged mainly to trained scholars, courtly environments, and specialized texts. It did not instantly replace the stories understood by wider communities. A person could hear that an eclipse followed a calculable cycle and still observe fasting, bathing, prayer, or protective customs inherited from family and religion. Such behavior should not be mistaken for evidence that people were incapable of rational thought. Human beings often live with several kinds of explanation at once. Someone may understand the physical cause of a storm while still treating it as spiritually meaningful. In the same way, the eclipse could be both predictable and sacred, measurable and unsettling. The deeper tension reaches back toward the origins of human culture. Our ancestors depended on shared stories because stories carried information through memory more easily than abstract rules. A narrative with characters, danger, pursuit, and return could be remembered by children and repeated across generations. Mathematical tables required training, notation, and careful correction. Each form served a different social purpose. The story spread meaning widely. The calculation gave specialists a way to anticipate the event. Over time, these methods could influence calendars, ritual timing, and the confidence of courts that wished to present themselves as aligned with cosmic order. Prediction reduced surprise, but it did not remove vulnerability. Even when an eclipse was expected, the gradual darkening of a full moon could still alter the emotional atmosphere of a community. Knowledge of mechanism does not always silence the body's response to unusual darkness. This helps explain why myth survived beside calculation. The return of the light remained visible to everyone, while the geometry behind it remained invisible without teaching. Rahu offered a memorable image of obstruction. Astronomy offered a testable account of shadow. The first could preserve fear and moral meaning. The second could improve prediction. Only one described the physical cause correctly, but both shaped history. The warning hidden in this coexistence was not that calculation had failed. It was that knowing when something will happen does not determine what people believe it means. A correct calculation could tell observers that the light would return, yet inherited practices could still tell them how to behave while waiting, whom to protect, what to avoid, and how to restore a shared sense of order afterward. The moon continued to move according to natural law, while human communities layered stories, numbers, duties, and emotions onto the same darkened surface. What seemed like a conflict between myth and science was often a long overlap, revealing that human understanding changes slowly because knowledge is carried not only by the mind, but also by institutions, rituals, identities, and memory. The eclipse ended, but but the experience did not disappear with the returning light. For observers who understood the event through the image of Rahu or another force of obstruction, darkness was temporary because the attacker could not hold the sun or moon forever. For astronomers, it was temporary because the bodies continued moving and the shadow would pass. These explanations were very different, yet both gave people a reason to expect restoration. Expectation mattered. A sudden change becomes less frightening when it has a known ending, even if the reason given for that ending is symbolic rather than physical. Rituals performed during an eclipse could therefore do more than express fear. They could organize waiting, fasting, prayer, bathing, silence, avoidance, or acts of purification marked the interval between the loss of ordinary light and its return. Customs varied across communities and centuries, and they should not be presented as one uniform practice. Their shared function was to place a disturbing event inside a sequence with a beginning, a period of caution, and a release. The moon did not require protection, cleansing, or rescue. Human beings did. A community faced with darkness could use familiar actions to restore emotional order before the sky restored visible order. This pattern reaches back toward the earliest human dependence on repeated cycles. Our ancestors survived because they learned that night ended, seasons changed, animals returned, and difficult conditions were not always permanent. Memory made endurance possible. Yet memory also preserved the moments when expected rhythms appeared to fail. An eclipse compressed both lessons into one event. The moon seemed to vanish, but it came back. Danger appeared real, but it did not remain. The resulting warning was therefore quieter than a prophecy of destruction. It said that stability could be interrupted, and that ordinary life should pause until the disturbance had passed. Such a message could influence food, travel, household behavior, religious duties, and the protection of vulnerable people. Even though the eclipse itself caused no contamination or bodily harm, the warning gained strength because the light always returned. If people had followed a ritual while waiting, the natural end of the eclipse could seem to confirm that the ritual had worked. A repeated event then reinforced a repeated response. Across generations, the behavior could survive even when its original explanation changed. This is one reason ancient warnings remain important. They show how a mistaken cause can be carried by an accurate memory. People correctly remembered that the darkness was temporary, that it followed recognizable conditions, and that the moon reappeared. What they could not always separate was the natural mechanism from the actions performed beneath it. Modern astronomy makes that separation possible. Earth's shadow moves across the moon without responding to prayer, fear, purity, or human conduct. Yet the emotional structure of the old warning remains understandable. Human beings still pause when a reliable system fails, even briefly. A power outage, a silent clock, or an unexpected darkness can produce discomfort because regularity provides safety. The ancient eclipse intensified that feeling on the largest visible scale. The sky itself seemed to stop behaving normally. The third warning therefore reveals neither a hidden enemy nor a secret property of the moon. It reveals a human method for living through uncertainty, name the obstruction, preserve the expected return, and create actions that make waiting bearable. This method could calm a household, unite a community, and carry memory forward, but it could also make symbolic rules feel physically necessary. The moon returned because motion continued, not because darkness had been defeated. Still, every return left behind a story about what people believed had protected them. Those stories shaped decisions far beyond ritual. In another ancient world, a commander would see an eclipsed moon and conclude that movement itself had become unsafe. There, waiting would no longer be only symbolic. It would change the fate of an army. In 413 BCE, the Athenian expedition in Sicily had reached a point where delay could be fatal. Years earlier, Athens had sent a large force across the sea to attack Syracuse, hoping to expand its influence and weaken enemies far from home. The campaign had not unfolded as expected. Syracuse resisted, reinforcements arrived, and the Athenians found themselves trapped in a land they did not fully control. Their ships had suffered, their soldiers were exhausted, disease had spread through the camp, and confidence had begun to collapse. The army that had once sailed with ambition now faced the simpler problem of survival. Nicias, One of the Athenian commanders had long been cautious about the expedition. Ancient accounts describe him as physically unwell, deeply religious, and hesitant to take unnecessary risks. These descriptions come from writers with their own purposes, so they should not be treated as direct access to his private thoughts. What can be said is that he commanded men under extreme pressure, with limited information and shrinking options. The Athenians had attempted to withdraw by sea, but the harbour had become dangerous. Enemy forces strengthened their position, while the Athenian fleet was no longer the confident instrument that had carried the expedition westward. A retreat by land remained possible, but it required speed, organisation, and a willingness to leave behind equipment, wounded men, and hopes of victory. In such conditions, every hour mattered. This was not the open landscape of humanity's earliest migrations, where a small group could change direction quietly when danger appeared. It was a crowded military crisis involving thousands of people, ships, supplies, commanders, allies, and enemies. Yet the old human problem remained the same. When should a group move, and when should it wait? Our earliest ancestors survived by judging weather, darkness, tracks, rivers, and the behavior of animals. A wrong decision could separate a group from water, shelter, or safety. In Sicily, that ancient decision had become political and military. The signs were no longer only on the ground. They were also in reports, rumours, the condition of the fleet, and the sky above the camp. Night offered concealment for departure, but darkness also made movement difficult. The moon could provide light, yet its appearance carried cultural meaning for people who did not separate celestial events from divine concern as modern astronomy does. Greek societies had long observed the sky, used calendars, and attached religious importance to unusual phenomena. They were not without natural explanations, but religious interpretation remained part of public and private life. For a commander such as Nicias, an unexpected event could therefore influence judgment even when the army's material situation already demanded action. For men who had crossed unfamiliar seas and watched companions die, the heavens offered one more source of uncertainty. A commander's caution could seem responsible, while immediate retreat could seem reckless. The meaning of the night itself would depend not on astronomy alone, but on authority. Before the eclipse occurred, the Athenians were preparing to leave. Their goal was no longer conquest. It was escape from a campaign that had consumed lives, wealth, and confidence. The decision had come late, but it still offered a chance. The soldiers needed to move before Syracuse closed the remaining routes and before morale weakened further. Around them stood the evidence of human error: damaged ships, sick men, abandoned plans, and an enemy growing stronger. Above them, the moon followed the same natural motion it had followed long before Athens, Syracuse, or any state existed. It had no knowledge of the expedition and no power to choose its outcome. Yet within hours, its darkening would enter the decision-making of the command. A shadow created by Earth would be interpreted through fear, piety, and inherited expectation. The fourth warning would not come from the moon. It would come from the belief that movement should stop until the sky appeared safe again. The Athenians were preparing to leave when the full moon began to darken. According to Thucydides, the eclipse occurred just as the force was ready to sail away from Syracuse. The event was not a mysterious change within the moon. Earth had moved between the sun and the moon, allowing its shadow to cross the lunar surface. Nothing in that alignment knew of Athens, Sicily, Nicias, or the thousands of exhausted men waiting below. Yet the soldiers did not experience the eclipse as distant geometry. They saw a familiar light weaken at the moment when they were about to begin a dangerous retreat. Many urged the commanders to wait. Nicias agreed, and ancient accounts connect his refusal to depart with his strong attachment to divination. Thucydides states that the army would not reconsider departure until 3 times 9 days had passed, following the advice attributed to diviners. This detail is often simplified into the claim that one superstitious man stopped an entire army. The reality described by the source is more complicated. Many Athenians were alarmed, and Nicias made the final decision within a culture where unusual celestial events could carry religious meaning. We cannot recover every soldier's thoughts, nor can we know whether all interpreted the darkness in precisely the same way. Some may have feared divine disapproval, others may simply have followed authority. Men already weakened by sickness and defeat may have found any unexplained sign difficult to ignore. The eclipse did not create their crisis. It entered a crisis that was already present. This is why the warning became powerful. A sign gains influence when it appears to confirm existing fear. The army had reasons to doubt its safety. Enemy forces were close, the fleet had suffered, and retreat itself promised hardship. The darkened moon gave those uncertainties a single visible form. For human beings whose distant ancestors survived by pausing when the environment changed unexpectedly, waiting could feel safer than moving. On a battlefield, however, caution is not automatically protection. The surroundings continued to change while the Athenians remained. Syracuse and its allies did not need the moon to tell them what to do. They could observe the enemy's weakness, strengthen their positions, and prepare to prevent escape. The natural event passed, but the military opportunity did not remain still. Ancient historians also shaped how later generations remembered the decision. Thucydides wrote close to the war to provide the account, but he selected details and judged character. His description of Nicias encourages readers to see excessive piety as a failure of command. That judgment seems reasonable, yet it remains an interpretation of leadership under pressure, not a transcript of every discussion inside the camp. The eclipse survives in history because its timing made the consequences easy to remember. Modern knowledge makes the physical situation clear. A lunar eclipse cannot identify a favorable day for travel, judge a commander, or forbid an army from moving. It offers no information about enemy plans, yet knowledge of mechanism should not tempt us to mock those who watched without modern astronomy. Greek thinkers had proposed natural explanations for eclipses, but such knowledge was not distributed evenly, and religious interpretation remained influential. Even a person familiar with natural causes could still believe that the timing carried meaning. Human minds often separate the question of how an event occurs from the question of why it occurred at a particular moment. The eclipse answered neither military question facing Nicias, but it appeared when uncertainty was greatest. That coincidence became a command. The fourth ancient warning was taking shape. Do not move, while the sky appears disturbed. It sounded cautious, respectful, and safe. In practice, it placed the timing of survival beneath an event unrelated to the enemy. The moon returned to brightness because the shadow moved onward. The Athenians remained because human interpretation had turned temporary darkness into a reason to surrender time. The delay did not destroy the Athenian expedition by itself, but it allowed an already dangerous situation to become worse. While the army waited, Syracuse and its allies strengthened their control of the harbour and prepared to prevent escape. The Athenians had lost the advantage of surprise. Their ships were damaged, their crews were tired, and the narrow waters favoured defenders who knew the local conditions. When the Athenians finally attempted to break out, the battle became confused and crowded. Ships collided, commands were difficult to hear, and the space needed for skilled manoeuvre had almost disappeared. The result was another defeat. The fleet that had carried Athens across the sea could no longer carry the surviving force home. Nicias and the other commander, Demosthenes, then led the army away by land. Thousands of soldiers began a retreat through hostile territory, short of food, weakened by illness, and pursued by enemy forces. The march ended in separation, surrender, and enormous loss. Many prisoners were confined in the stone quarries near Syracuse where conditions were severe. Ancient accounts describe suffering, hunger, exposure, and death, though exact numbers remain uncertain and should not be treated as secure. The campaign became one of the most damaging failures in Athenian history. It is tempting to say that the moon defeated Athens, because the eclipse offers a clear and memorable turning point. That statement would be false. The moon did not choose a side, change the harbour, weaken the ships, or command the Syracusans. The expedition had been shaped by political ambition, poor planning, divided leadership, disease resistance, and military decisions made over several years. Even without the eclipse, escape was not guaranteed. Yet the delay mattered because time was one of the few resources the Athenians still possessed. Their interpretation of the sky helped them surrender that resource to the enemy. This is how belief can enter history without becoming a physical cause. A natural event influences nothing directly, but people respond to it, and their response changes what happens next. The same pattern began near the earliest stages of human life, when pausing at an unfamiliar sound could prevent danger. Caution protected individuals when the signal came from a real threat nearby. In Sicily, the signal came from a distant celestial alignment in space that contained no military information. An ancient survival instinct had been carried into a world of armies, diviners, authority, and inherited religious meaning. The decision to wait felt protective because it respected the warning. In reality, it protected the opponent's opportunity. The fourth ancient warning therefore contains a difficult lesson. Not every pause is wisdom, and not every movement is recklessness. The value of caution depends on whether the sign being followed is connected to the danger at hand. A commander must distinguish between evidence and coincidence, between what can change the situation and what merely appears beside it. Nicias faced sickness, damaged ships, enemy preparation, and failing morale. Those were real signals. The eclipse was visually powerful but strategically empty. History remembers it because the contrast is so clear from a modern distance. We understand the shadow, while the Athenians lived inside the fear. Yet the lesson is not limited to ancient superstition. Human beings still allow dramatic events to outweigh quieter evidence. A sudden image can dominate judgment even when slower facts matter more. The moon over Syracuse became such an image. It did not close the road home. It changed the meaning of departure in the minds of those who still had the power to choose. By the time they chose again, the world around them had moved on. This difference between a passing shadow and a vanishing opportunity is the center of the warning. Nature resumed its rhythm without consequence, while delay continued accumulating consequences among bodies, broken ships, and narrowing roads. The sky had returned to normal, but the opportunity beneath it had not. Among the ancient Maya, time was not treated as a single line moving toward one final end. It was measured through several interlocking cycles, each serving different purposes in ritual, history, agriculture, and political life. The best known included a 260-day ritual count and a solar year of roughly 365 days, which combined to create longer repeating patterns. Maya scribes and specialists also recorded longer spans through the long count, allowing events to be placed within a far larger historical framework. These systems did not form one simple calendar, and they should not be reduced to the modern claim that the Maya predicted the end of the world. The completion of a cycle was not automatically the destruction of time. It could mark renewal, commemoration, obligation, or the return of a meaningful date. For rulers and communities, keeping time helped connect ceremonies with remembered events and with recurring changes in the natural world. Rainfall, planting, harvests, and seasonal movement mattered deeply. But scholars should avoid assuming that every agricultural decision was controlled by a single calendar rule. Local environments varied, and practical knowledge came from generations of observation. The sky provided another layer of order. The sun marked changes across the year. Venus followed a striking pattern of appearances and disappearances. The moon offered visible phases and changing positions that could be compared over many nights. Maya monuments and surviving painted books show that trained observers paid close attention to celestial cycles, though much of their knowledge was lost when manuscripts were destroyed and traditions were disrupted after European conquest. Only a few pre-colonial Maya books survive, so any reconstruction remains incomplete. What remains is enough to show that time was closely joined with power, memory, and ritual responsibility. A ruler could present an event as the return of an earlier sacred pattern, placing a present ceremony beside a remembered past. In this way, a date did more than locate a moment. It connected generations. That habit reaches toward the earliest human need to recognize recurrence. Long before cities appeared in the Maya lowlands, human groups survived by remembering when water, plants, animals, and weather returned. Repeated conditions allowed preparation. Maya calendrical systems carried this old strength into written and institutional forms of remarkable complexity. Yet every system built on recurrence also creates intervals of concern. A cycle can tell people when something is due, but it can also identify periods when danger is considered possible. Celestial tables did not necessarily promise a perfect prediction of every event visible from one location. They could organize windows in which an eclipse might occur, and surround those windows with ritual meaning. This is where the seventh journey toward an ancient warning begins. The warning was not that Maya time was counting down to an apocalypse. It was that time contained recurring moments of vulnerability, and knowledgeable people were expected to recognize them. Calculation became a form of preparation. Ritual became a way to respond. The moon and sun were not passive decorations above society, yet neither were they proven forces controlling human fate. They were observed bodies placed within a cultural system that joined numbers, gods, rulers, rain, memory, and danger. Modern astronomy separates orbital motion from divine intention. Maya records often place them within the same ordered world. To understand that world honestly, neither its mathematics nor its sacred meaning should be ignored. Dates carved on monuments could reach backward to ancestral events and forward to anniversaries, showing that Maya chronology could hold vast spans without implying that time would suddenly stop. Political leaders used such dates to place themselves within inherited order, while specialists maintained calculations that made those connections possible. The calendar was an archive of authority, preserved in numbers, memory, and ritual performance. The architecture of Maya time reveals a civilization looking for stability not by escaping cycles, but by learning how to live inside their return. The surviving Dresden Codex contains a sequence of pages devoted to eclipses, preserving numbers, day signs, deities, and images of celestial danger within the same visual field. It is one of only a few Maya books that escaped destruction, and its present form was copied long after the first methods behind its tables had begun to develop. The people who prepared it were not watching the sky casually. They worked with accumulated observations, calendrical arithmetic, and inherited rules that allowed future intervals to be compared with the past. The eclipse table covers a long chain of lunar months, divided by intervals that often correspond to 5 or 6 cycles of the moon. Eclipses do not occur at every new or full moon because the moon's orbit is tilted relative to Earth's path around the Sunday. They become possible only when the alignment occurs near the points where those orbital paths cross. Maya specialists did not express this geometry through modern diagrams, yet their table successfully identified recurring periods when an eclipse could occur. It functioned less like a promise that every marked date would produce a visible eclipse above one city, and more like a warning system for dangerous possibilities. Visibility depended on location, time, weather, and whether the event involved the sun or the moon. A table could indicate that the celestial conditions were present without guaranteeing that every observer in Maya territory would see darkness. This distinction protects their achievement from both exaggeration and dismissal. The table was neither supernatural prophecy nor meaningless numerology. It was a carefully organized method for following recurrence across more time than one observer could personally remember. That method grew from an ability as old as humanity itself. Early groups learned to connect returning seasons with food, water, migration, and shelter. Maya calendar specialists extended the same dependence on shared memory into writing and mathematics. Instead of trusting only a living witness, they allowed painted signs and numbers to carry a pattern into another generation. Yet the pages did not separate calculation from sacred danger. Images associated with darkness, destruction, suspended bodies, or powerful beings appear beside the numerical structure. Scholars continue to examine the exact meaning of these scenes, so they should not be translated into one simple prediction of disaster. Their presence nevertheless shows that identifying an eclipse interval was not emotionally neutral. A possible eclipse could be treated as a period requiring ritual attention. The warning concerned timing. Danger might become visible within this portion of the cycle, and the community should be prepared. Preparation did not cause the eclipse or prevent it. The sun, earth, and moon continued through their motions without responding to human action. But the table gave specialists a way to reduce surprise and organize ceremonial responsibility. This was a different use of prediction from the modern desire to observe an eclipse for pleasure. Knowledge was valuable because it allowed society to meet a feared event in an ordered manner. Numbers placed boundaries around uncertainty. They could not say with certainty what every person would see, but they could say when vigilance was appropriate. The seventh warning therefore begins with a remarkable reversal. Calculation did not make the heavens harmless. It made possible danger easier to locate within time. The more carefully the Maya tracked recurrence, the more precisely they could identify intervals carrying ritual concern. What looks to us like astronomy and what looked to them like sacred responsibility could occupy the same page, because both arose from one need: to remember when the familiar sky might change. In this sense, the warning table joined patient observation with social memory, allowing uncertainty to be managed without ever removing the fear attached to it for the community. The table did not announce final destruction of the world. It preserved a disciplined way of waiting for a shadow that might appear, pass, and return in another generation. Prediction can reduce surprise, but it does not automatically remove fear. Maya specialists who followed eclipse intervals could know that a dangerous celestial event was becoming possible, yet this knowledge did not make the event empty. It could instead create a period of waiting in which concern became focused. A shadow that arrived without warning was frightening because it seemed chaotic. A shadow expected through calculation could be frightening because its approach now had a place in the calendar. Numbers gave uncertainty a boundary, but they also gave it a date. This distinction helps explain why astronomy and ritual could remain joined. The table in the Dresden Codex did not need to fail for ceremonial responses to continue. Its purpose was not identical to that of a modern forecast. It organized time, memory, and responsibility within a society where celestial change could carry sacred and political meaning. A trained specialist might recognize that not every marked interval would produce an eclipse visible from a particular city. Even so, the interval could still be treated with caution because the possibility mattered. Human beings have always acted under incomplete knowledge. Near the beginning of our species, a track did not prove that a predator was close, yet it could justify alertness. Dark clouds did not guarantee a storm, but they could change where a group rested. Survival often depended on responding before certainty arrived. Maya eclipse tables placed that ancient habit inside a written system. The difference was that the possible danger now came from a distant alignment whose physical effects did not threaten crops, bodies, or rulers in the way ritual images suggested. The caution was understandable, but the assumed danger belonged to interpretation. This is why prediction did not dissolve fear. Calculation answered when a change might be seen, not what the change meant. Sacred narratives, inherited duties, and political expectations supplied the meaning. If an eclipse occurred near a marked interval, the table appeared confirmed. If none was visible, the possibility could still be preserved because visibility depended on geography and timing. A flexible system of meaning could therefore survive beside disciplined observation. The same pattern appears throughout human history. Accurate records can improve knowledge while older explanations continue to shape behavior. A sailor may understand tides mathematically and still keep a protective custom. A farmer may follow weather reports while repeating a family ritual before planting. Knowledge does not enter an empty mind. It enters a world already filled with memory. For the Maya, the sky remained embedded within that remembered world. Cycles linked the living with ancestors, rulers with earlier dates, and present ceremonies with future returns. An eclipse interval, therefore, belonged to more than astronomy. It reminded society that order required attention. The seventh warning was not that the moon or sun would destroy the world. It was that even a measurable sky could contain periods when ordinary confidence should weaken. This warning reveals a limit of knowledge. Knowing that darkness will pass may calm the intellect while leaving the body uneasy. The community still gathers. The calendar still marks a dangerous interval. Modern observers often watch eclipses with excitement because science has explained the mechanism and predicted the timing accurately. Yet even now, the event can feel strange because daylight fades or the full moon changes color. The difference is that modern astronomy does not treat this feeling as evidence of supernatural danger. It allows wonder without turning wonder into a warning. Maya specialists moved gradually along the path toward that separation by recognizing recurrence, but their surviving pages show that calculation remained inside a sacred universe. Their achievement was not diminished by this. It reveals how human understanding grows in layers. Numbers can tame uncertainty, stories can preserve its emotional weight, and both can endure together. The eclipse table did not conquer fear. It taught a civilization how to wait for fear on schedule. In some Mesoamerican communities, an eclipse could be understood not only as a disturbance in the sky, but as a danger entering the human body. Some traditions recorded in colonial sources and later community practices connected eclipses with pregnancy, birth, and the vulnerability of unborn children. These beliefs were not identical across all peoples, regions, or centuries, and they should not be treated as one ancient rule shared by everyone. The surviving evidence is uneven because many pre-colonial records were destroyed, while later descriptions were written through the assumptions of missionaries, officials, physicians, and local informants. Even so, a repeated pattern can be seen. When the sun or moon appeared damaged, bitten, covered, or weakened, people sometimes feared that a developing child might also be marked by that disturbance. The connection was symbolic, not physical. An eclipse does not cause birth defects, miscarriage, illness, or changes in a child's body. A lunar eclipse is simply Earth's shadow crossing the moon. Yet for families without that explanation, the visual event could feel closely connected to the hidden process of pregnancy. Both involved change that could not be fully seen. The moon altered in public above the community, while a child developed unseen within the mother. A culture seeking patterns could place these two mysteries beside each other. This response reaches back toward the oldest human concern for the next generation. Long before cities or written calendars, pregnancy carried uncertainty and childbirth could be dangerous. Communities survived only if infants, mothers, and caregivers received protection. People watched food, weather, movement, illness, and social behavior for anything that might threaten a developing life. When knowledge was limited, symbolic dangers could be treated as seriously as visible ones. An eclipse offered a powerful image because a familiar celestial body seemed to lose its normal form. If the moon could be altered, then perhaps a vulnerable body could be altered as well. Such reasoning does not show a lack of care. It shows care operating through an incorrect model of cause. Families may have changed behavior, remained indoors, avoided looking at the sky, covered the body, or used protective objects during the event. The details varied, and some customs known today may have changed greatly over time. Researchers therefore speak cautiously about direct continuity between pre-colonial beliefs and modern practices. A tradition can preserve an old structure while replacing its words, objects, or explanations. The central structure here is the belief that celestial disturbance can cross the boundary between sky and body. That boundary mattered because the pregnant body represented the future of the household and community. Fear gathered around it not because the moon possessed biological power, but because uncertainty demanded a target for protection. Modern medicine finds no mechanism by which an eclipse can shape fetal development. Looking at a lunar eclipse is not harmful, although looking directly at the sun during a solar eclipse can damage the eyes without proper protection. The old warning should therefore be understood historically, not followed as medical guidance. Its value lies in what it reveals about human thought. When people cannot see a process clearly, they often connect it to another visible event occurring nearby in time. The coincidence becomes memorable, especially when a difficult birth or unusual condition follows. Successful births after protective rituals can also strengthen the belief, because the ritual receives credit for an outcome that would have occurred naturally. The warning also transferred responsibility onto the expectant mother, who could be judged for failing to follow protective customs. This pressure mattered even when the feared celestial harm was unreal, because belief shaped how families interpreted responsibility, blame, obedience, and care during an uncertain pregnancy. In this way, fear, care, memory, and coincidence can build a tradition together. The eclipse entered the body only through meaning, but that meaning could shape real behavior around pregnancy, turning a distant shadow into a household warning. Protective customs surrounding eclipses often focused on giving vulnerable people something concrete to wear, hold, avoid, or perform. In parts of Mesoamerica, later ethnographic and historical accounts describe pregnant women using cords, metal objects, blades, red cloth, or other protective items during an eclipse. The exact objects, meanings, and dates differ across communities, so no single practice should be presented as universal or unchanged from the pre-colonial past. Some traditions may preserve older ideas, while others may have developed through later contact, local adaptation, or family memory. What they share is a practical shape. A danger believed to come from the sky was answered by placing a barrier close to the body. A blade might symbolize cutting or repelling harm. A thread or cord might mark protection around the waist or clothing. A red object could carry associations with blood, life, or resistance. These meanings were symbolic, and the objects had no demonstrated ability to protect fetal development from an eclipse. The moon's shadow cannot enter a body, alter a child, or mark a pregnancy. Still, the custom could feel convincing because it transformed an invisible fear into a visible action. Waiting without doing anything can intensify anxiety. Holding an object, covering the body, staying indoors, or following a family instruction gives the mind a sense of control. This psychological effect does not make the belief scientifically true, but it helps explain why it could endure. The practice also connected one generation of women with another. Advice from mothers, grandmothers, midwives, and neighbors carried authority because it came from experience, even when the assumed cause was mistaken. A successful birth after the ritual could be remembered as evidence that protection had worked. A difficult outcome could be explained as incomplete obedience, exposure at the wrong moment, or failure to use the proper object. In this way, the belief could survive almost any result. The pattern reaches toward the earliest human efforts to protect pregnancy with the knowledge available at the time. Our ancestors learned that some foods, injuries, infections, environmental stresses, and social conditions could affect survival, even though they could not identify every mechanism. Useful caution and symbolic caution became mixed together. Rest, shelter, community support, and skilled assistance could offer real benefits, while an amulet aimed at an eclipse could not, yet both might be remembered within the same protective tradition. This mixture makes historical interpretation delicate. It would be unfair to dismiss every old practice as meaningless, but it would be equally wrong to present symbolic protection as medicine. The body deserves evidence, especially where pregnancy and childhood are concerned. Modern medical knowledge does not support claims that lunar eclipses cause miscarriage, deformity, birthmarks, or developmental harm. A pregnant person does not need a blade, thread, charm, or special covering because the moon is darkened. The danger during a solar eclipse concerns looking directly at the sun, without proper eye protection, not pregnancy itself. The ancient warning, therefore, reveals more about human anxiety than lunar influence. It shows how families respond when care is urgent, but knowledge is incomplete. They build a small circle of protection around the person carrying the future. The circle may be made of cloth, metal, words, rules, or attentive relatives. Its physical claims may be false, but its emotional purpose is recognizable. A distant shadow became a household emergency because the unborn child represented continuity, and continuity was too important to leave exposed to uncertainty. The cost appeared when protection turned into blame. If a mother looked upward, left home, or forgot an object, illness could be attributed to her behavior. A custom intended to reduce fear could place another burden on someone facing uncertainty. This matters because beliefs do not remain inside stories. They shape responsibility, obedience, and judgment. The moon harmed no child, yet the warning could alter how she was watched, restricted, reassured, or accused by those near her. The old warning surrounding pregnancy was never only about the sky. It gathered around the most uncertain passage in human life, the arrival of a new generation. In every society, pregnancy and birth carried hope together with risk. Before modern medicine, many causes of illness, miscarriage, difficult labor, or infant death were poorly understood. Families could observe that some pregnancies ended safely while others did not, yet the reasons often remained invisible. When knowledge cannot identify a cause, the mind looks for a pattern. An eclipse offered a powerful pattern because it was rare, dramatic, and shared by everyone who looked upward. If a child was born ill after such an event, the timing could become part of the family story. If a protective ritual had been followed and the child was healthy, the ritual could receive credit. Both memories strengthened the belief, even though neither proved that the moon had affected the body. This way of reasoning is deeply human. Near the beginning of our species, people survived by remembering events that seemed connected. A certain plant might ease pain. A certain place might contain water. A certain sound might warn of danger. Useful knowledge grew from repeated experience, but coincidence could be preserved beside it. The eclipse belief belonged to this difficult border between care and mistaken cause. It tried to protect life, yet it placed fear in the wrong source. The real dangers surrounding pregnancy came from infection, nutrition, injury, blood loss, inherited conditions, access to help, and many other factors that people could not always see or control. The moon did not add another threat. What it added was an image through which uncertainty could be understood. A darkened moon resembled a wounded body. A missing light resembled a future placed at risk. The warning, therefore, became a language for anxiety. It allowed families to say that danger had arrived from somewhere, and that obedience might keep it away. This could offer comfort, but it could also create blame. If a child was born with a visible difference, relatives might search for a broken rule, an uncovered body, an unfastened cord, or a glance toward the eclipse. The mother could be treated as responsible for an outcome she had no power to cause. A belief created to defend the vulnerable could make the vulnerable person more exposed to judgment. That consequence matters because cultural ideas have real effects, even when their physical claims are false. They can limit movement, increase fear, change family relationships, and shape how illness is explained. At the same time, these practices also reveal tenderness. Communities did not create protective customs because they were indifferent. They created them because the future felt fragile. The unborn child represented continuity between ancestors and descendants, between memory and possibility. Protecting that child meant protecting the group's place in time. The eighth journey toward an ancient warning, therefore, returns to the central question of the moon. It was not what people thought it was, because it did not reach into pregnancy, mark bodies, or decide who would be born safely. Yet the belief tells us something true about humanity. When knowledge was limited, people placed their deepest fears onto the largest visible changes around them. The sky became a mirror for the body, and the eclipse became a symbol for everything that could go wrong before anyone understood why. Modern science allows a gentler conclusion. The darkness passes without entering the womb. The moon changes only in appearance, while human care must remain directed toward real causes, reliable support, and compassion rather than blame. Understanding this difference does not diminish the people who carried the custom. It honors their concern while freeing later generations from a burden the sky never imposed upon any family. The warning survives as a historical lesson. Fear can protect attention, but only evidence can tell us where protection is truly needed. During a total lunar eclipse, the moon can appear copper, orange, or deep red, creating one of the most memorable sights in the night sky. The color is not produced by blood, fire, or any change within the moon itself. It appears because Earth moves between the sun and the full moon, placing the lunar surface inside Earth's shadow. If Earth blocked all sunlight completely, the moon would become almost invisible. Instead, some sunlight passes through the outer edge of Earth's atmosphere before reaching it. The atmosphere bends a portion of that light into the shadow. Shorter blue wavelengths are scattered more strongly in the air, while more red and orange light continues through the long path around Earth. That filtered light then falls upon the moon and returns to the eyes of observers below. In a quiet physical sense, the red moon carries the colors of every sunrise and sunset occurring around Earth's edge at that moment. Its appearance can vary from one eclipse to another because Earth's atmosphere is never perfectly constant. Clouds, dust, volcanic particles, and other material can affect how much light reaches the lunar surface and what colors dominate. Scientists can describe these differences without treating every shade as a message. The moon does not decide to become red. It receives altered sunlight from the world around which it moves. For ancient observers, however, the mechanism was hidden. They saw a pale, familiar disk lose brightness and take on a color associated with blood, fire, wounds, danger, and death. The transformation occurred slowly enough to be watched, yet quickly enough to feel unnatural. The full moon represented completion within its visible cycle. Seeing that completed light turn dark red could therefore resemble injury at the moment of greatest brightness. The mind often interprets color before it understands cause. Red attracts attention because, throughout human life, it can signal ripe food, heat, blood, inflammation, or danger. This does not mean evolution gave every culture one identical reaction to a red moon. Meanings differ across societies, and no universal ancient interpretation should be assumed. Still, the colour offered powerful material for symbolic language. A community could describe the moon as wounded, burning, poisoned, or transformed because those images translated an unfamiliar celestial event into experiences known from the body and landscape. This connection reaches back toward the beginnings of humanity. Our ancestors needed to notice colour changes in skin, plants, animals, fire, and weather. A sudden red mark could matter. When the same attention was directed upward, the celestial colour felt important, even though it carried no information about war, disease, rulers, or moral judgment. The seventh ancient warning begins with this mistaken transfer. A real colour was given an earthly meaning. The moon appeared to contain blood, but the red light actually carried a trace of Earth's atmosphere. This reversal changes the way the event can be understood. What seemed like a wound on another world was partly a reflection of conditions surrounding our own. Every observer looking upward was seeing sunlight altered by the thin layer of air that makes life on Earth possible. The sight remained dramatic, but its cause was neither violent nor supernatural. It was a meeting of shadow, atmosphere, light, and motion. No voice came from the lunar surface, and no force crossed the distance to touch human affairs during that unusual night. The only signal was light, interpreted through memories formed on Earth. The warning began when observers treated resemblance as evidence and colour as intention. Modern astronomy allows people to watch without believing that disaster has been announced. Yet understanding the mechanism does not remove the deeper image. The red moon still reminds us how quickly perception becomes meaning. Before anyone asks what an event is, the human mind often asks what it resembles. In ancient societies, resemblance could become warning, and warning could become history across the world. Long before modern astronomy explained the red moon through light passing around Earth, ancient writers used the image of a darkened or blood-coloured moon to speak about upheaval. In the Near East and Mediterranean world, blood was one of the strongest visible signs available to human language. It could mean injury, sacrifice, warfare, death, kinship, or life leaving the body. When that colour appeared in the sky, poets and religious authors could use it to describe a world in which ordinary boundaries seemed to be breaking. Such language was not a scientific claim that the moon literally became blood. It was symbolic language shaped by experiences on Earth. In some biblical passages, the sun is described as darkening, and the moon as turning to blood within scenes of judgment, invasion, or cosmic disorder. These texts were written in different periods and served different purposes, so they should not be treated as one simple prediction of a future eclipse. Their imagery belongs to a literary tradition in which changes in the heavens express the seriousness of events below. A red moon could make war feel universal, as though violence had reached beyond cities and fields into the structure of the sky. Similar connections between unusual celestial appearances and political danger appeared across neighbouring cultures, though the exact meanings differed. The colour itself did not announce battle. Human beings carried the memory of battle into the colour. This distinction matters because resemblance is not cause. A red lunar eclipse may occur during peace, prosperity, famine, or conflict without producing any of them. Ancient communities, however, lived in worlds where war, crop failure, epidemic disease, and political collapse could arrive with little warning. When a rare celestial event appeared near one of these disasters, memory could join them together. The event in the sky was easier to preserve in story than the many quiet causes that had produced suffering on the ground. A ruler's decisions, failed alliances, exhausted soil, disrupted trade, or spreading illness developed over time. The red moon appeared in one visible night. It offered history a single image. This human preference for vivid signs reaches back toward the beginning of our species. Our ancestors needed to notice blood because it could indicate injury, prey, danger, or the need for care. Red demanded attention close to the body. When the same colour appeared above, the old response remained even though the source was distant and harmless. Culture then gave that response a moral and political vocabulary. The sky seemed wounded, because society felt wounded. The moon seemed stained, because human life had become stained by violence. This did not make the metaphor empty. Symbolic language can express fear with great force, and it can preserve the emotional reality of a generation facing destruction. The problem begins when metaphor is treated as physical evidence. A verse about the moon becoming blood cannot establish that an eclipse predicts war, divine punishment, or the end of the world. Modern eclipse calculations show that these events follow regular alignments and can be predicted without reference to human conduct. The ancient warning, therefore, belongs to history, literature, and belief, not to astronomy as a forecast of fate. Yet it remains valuable because it shows how people use the heavens to enlarge human experience. A local battle could be described as cosmic disorder. A political collapse could be imagined as darkness reaching the moon. The image made suffering feel visible to the universe, even when the universe was indifferent. The omen gave fear a shape that memory could preserve long after the crisis had ended. The seventh warning was not that blood had entered the moon. It was that human violence had become so difficult to contain in ordinary language that people placed its colour in the sky. What looked like a celestial wound was often a reflection of wounds already carried by those who watched. The red moon appears to belong entirely to the sky, yet its colour is created by the world beneath the observer. During a total lunar eclipse, sunlight passes through the outer layers of Earth's atmosphere before reaching the lunar surface. The air scatters much of the blue light and allows more red and orange light to continue along the longer path. That filtered light bends into Earth's shadow, touches the moon, and returns again to human eyes. What looks like a wound on another world is therefore partly an image of our own atmosphere. The moon becomes a screen upon which Earth briefly reveals the character of its surrounding air. Dust, clouds, smoke, and volcanic particles can alter the darkness and colour of an eclipse, making one event appear brighter or deeper than another. The moon has not changed its material. The pathway of light has changed. This reversal is important because ancient warnings often treated the red colour as something happening to the moon. A celestial body seemed injured, angered, poisoned, or transformed. Modern astronomy shows that the red light carries no message from the lunar surface. It has travelled from the sun, through the edge of Earth's atmosphere, across space, and back to Earth after reflection. The warning that appeared to come from above was shaped by conditions surrounding the people below. In a physical sense, every observer was looking at Earth's shadow and Earth's filtered light at the same time. The planet stood between the sun and moon, blocking direct brightness while allowing a dim red glow to pass around its edge. This image reaches back toward the earliest human relationship with the night. Our ancestors watched the moon as though it belonged to a separate realm, distant from fires, bodies, rivers, and weather. Yet the eclipse quietly joins those realms. Air close to human life determines the colour seen on a world far away. The same thin atmosphere that carries clouds, wind, breath, and weather also shapes the appearance of the eclipsed moon. Nothing supernatural is required. The beauty comes from connection rather than intention. Still, the event can feel personal, because Earth itself creates the shadow. The red moon is not a warning directed at humanity, but it is a reminder that observation always begins from a particular place. People never see the universe from nowhere. They see through air, culture, memory, expectation, and the limits of their instruments. Ancient societies look through inherited stories. Modern observers look through scientific models. The models are stronger when they can be tested, corrected, and used to predict what will happen. Even so, perception still arrives before explanation. The colour appears, the body responds, and meaning begins to form. The seventh ancient warning grew in that brief distance between seeing and understanding. Blood, war, judgment, and disorder entered the moon, because those meanings already existed in human life. The sky became a mirror, though people believed they were reading a message. Once the mechanism is understood, the mirror becomes clearer. The red light does not reveal the future. It reveals the path sunlight took through Earth's atmosphere. It tells us more about geometry, air, and our position than about fate. The moon remains silent, but its silence is not empty. It allows humanity to see how easily fear can be projected outward and returned as certainty. Across centuries, observers thought they were watching the moon change into something dangerous. In reality, they were watching their own planet place a shadow across it, and colour that shadow with the light of every distant horizon. The ancient warning pointed toward disaster, but the physical event points home. The deeper discovery is not hidden inside the moon, but inside humanity's act of interpretation. It asks us to notice that what seems foreign, wounded, or threatening in the sky may sometimes carry the outline of the world from which we are looking. For most of human history, the moon appeared smooth because distance erased its details. To the unaided eye, it was a pale disk marked by broad dark regions and changing shadows, but its surface could still be imagined as perfect, polished, or fundamentally unlike Earth. That image began to weaken when telescopic observation revealed a more complicated world. Early observers using improved instruments saw uneven boundaries between light and darkness, bright points rising inside shadow, and dark depressions surrounded by illuminated edges. These effects were difficult to explain if the lunar surface were completely smooth. They suggested mountains, valleys, and broken ground. Galileo famously drew the changing shadows he observed, comparing them with the way sunlight moves across mountains on Earth. He was not the only person examining the moon, and the history of telescopic discovery involved several observers, instruments, and competing interpretations. Yet the central change was unmistakable. The moon could no longer remain a flawless lamp suspended above an imperfect world. It had terrain. It possessed height, depth, roughness, and a history written into stone. The dark plains once called seas were not oceans of liquid water. They were vast regions of hardened volcanic rock formed in the distant past. The brighter highlands were older and more heavily marked by impacts. Circular features that earlier observers struggled to explain were gradually understood as craters, many created when asteroids and other objects struck the surface at high speed. Modern spacecraft later photographed these landscapes in detail, while astronauts and robotic missions examined them from close range. The moon was not an untouched sphere. It was a scarred record of events that had accumulated over immense spans of time. Without thick air, flowing rivers, or active weather to erase them, many features remained visible far longer than comparable marks on Earth over time. The moon became a kind of archive, preserving evidence that our restless planet had repeatedly buried, reshaped, or carried back into its interior. This discovery changed more than astronomy. It altered a contrast that many societies had placed between heaven and Earth. The sky had often represented permanence, order, and purity, while the ground below carried erosion, decay, injury, and change. The lunar surface showed that the heavens also bore damage. Mountains could collapse, lava could spread, and impacts could reshape an entire region. The moon appeared calm, only because most of its dramatic changes had occurred long before human observers were present. That stillness had encouraged the belief that it stood outside history. Science placed it back inside time. This return to time connects directly with the beginning of humanity. Our ancestors learned to read stone surfaces for tracks, fractures, water, shelter, and signs of earlier movement. Telescopic astronomy extended that old human skill beyond Earth. Shadows became evidence. Shapes became questions. Repeated observations allowed people to test whether a bright point was truly a mountain catching sunlight or merely an illusion. The moon was no longer interpreted only through stories attached to colour, disappearance, or ritual timing. Its physical landscape could be studied through measurement. This did not make every question easy. Early observers debated the origins of craters, and later scientists continued refining their understanding as new evidence arrived. Knowledge advanced not because one person suddenly possessed the complete truth, but because observations became more precise and explanations were forced to account for them. The 10th journey, therefore, begins with a reversal. Ancient warnings treated the moon as a source of messages about Earth. Telescopic science began treating the moon as a world with its own material history. The scars were not symbols of kings, armies, pregnancy, or judgment. They were evidence of impacts, volcanism, cooling, and long exposure to space. What humanity had taken for a perfect celestial face became an ancient landscape, silent not because nothing had happened there, but because almost everything had happened before our species learned to look closely. The moon scars do more than show that impacts occurred. They preserve a record of how the inner solar system changed over time. Earth once experienced many of the same collisions, but wind, rain, oceans, living organisms, volcanism, and the slow movement of tectonic plates erased or buried much of that evidence. The Moon has no thick atmosphere, no flowing surface water, and no active plate tectonics comparable to Earth's. Its ancient terrain therefore retains marks that our own planet has largely lost. By studying crater sizes, overlapping patterns, volcanic plains, and returned rock samples, scientists can reconstruct parts of a history that began long before the first human ancestor looked upward. The leading explanation for the Moon's formation is the giant impact model. In broad terms, it proposes that early Earth was struck by a large planetary body while the solar system was still young. Material thrown into orbit later gathered together and formed the Moon. Evidence from lunar samples, computer models, orbital behavior, and the chemical relationship between Earth and Moon supports this general picture. Yet the details remain under study. Researchers continue to examine the size, speed, angle, and composition of the impact, how thoroughly material mixed, and how the Moon acquired its present internal structure. The responsible conclusion is not that science has solved every step. It is that a major collision remains the strongest framework available for explaining the evidence. The samples returned by crewed missions and studied in laboratories have been valuable because their minerals preserve ages and conditions that remote images cannot reveal alone. Robotic missions and orbital instruments add context, allowing evidence from a few locations to be compared with the wider lunar landscape. This origin gives the Moon a deeper connection with Earth than ancient observers could have imagined. It was not placed nearby as a warning lamp. It emerged from violent processes that shaped the young planetary system. Its later surface was altered by repeated impacts, while heat within it produced widespread volcanism. Lava filled enormous basins and cooled into the dark plains visible from Earth. Over time, internal activity weakened and the surface became quieter. The Moon still experiences small impacts and moonquakes, but it is not changing at the speed familiar on Earth. Its apparent stillness is therefore the result of geological decline, not timeless perfection. This history reaches toward the origin of humanity in an indirect but important way. Long before primates, mammals, forests, or oceans in their present forms, the Moon was already influencing the physical environment of Earth. Its gravity contributed to tides and interacted with Earth's rotation. Scientists continue to study the details of how this relationship changed through deep time, so it would be misleading to reduce human evolution to a simple claim that the Moon made us possible. Life and human origins depended on many interacting conditions. Still, the Earth-Moon system formed part of the stable environment within which those conditions developed. The ancient surface above us therefore holds traces of a history older than biology and far older than memory. Every crater belongs to an event that happened without witnesses. Every dark plain records molten rock that cooled before any story could name it. The Moon is not mysterious because it hides a secret civilization or an artificial shell. It is mysterious because the evidence is ancient, incomplete, and difficult to recover. Science approaches that mystery by comparing rocks, measurements, models, and observations, then revising explanations when they fail. The old warnings asked what the Moon intended. Modern investigation asks what processes shaped it. That change in questioning is one of the clearest differences between omen and evidence. The Moon's damaged surface does not predict what will happen to human societies. It tells us that worlds themselves have histories, that apparently permanent objects can be products of catastrophe and change, and that silence can preserve a record more faithfully than memory. The Moon does influence Earth, but its real influence is quieter and more limited than the powers people have often assigned to it. Its gravity contributes to ocean tides, working together with the gravity of the sun and the shape of coastlines, seafloors, and weather. Tides are not produced by moonlight, and they do not rise in the same way everywhere. In some places, the difference between high and low water is dramatic. In others, it is modest. Coastal communities learned these rhythms through observation long before anyone could describe gravity mathematically. For fishing, travel, gathering shellfish, entering harbours, or crossing tidal ground, that knowledge could protect lives. The pattern was physical, visible, and testable. If the Moon changed position, the timing and strength of tides changed in ways that could be measured. This is different from claiming that the Moon controls decisions, anger, fertility, illness, or fate. Such claims often begin with a real cycle and then extend beyond the evidence. The human body contains water, but that does not mean lunar gravity pulls thoughts or organs as it moves oceans. The tides depend on differences in gravitational force across Earth's immense size, not on a simple attraction to water alone. A cup, a lake, and a human body do not respond like an ocean basin. The moon also provides natural light at night, and that light can alter visibility, activity, and experience. Before artificial lighting, a bright moon could make travel easier or make concealment harder. It could affect the behavior of some animals and therefore influence how people hunted, watched, or moved. Near the beginnings of humanity, these practical changes mattered because survival depended on reading the landscape after sunset. Yet, an environmental condition is not a command. Moonlight may change what can be seen, but it does not decide what a person will do. Popular ideas about full moons causing madness, crime, accidents, births, or universal sleep disturbance have not gained consistent scientific support. Individual studies sometimes report associations, while others fail to reproduce them or find that factors explain the pattern better. The responsible conclusion is not that each lunar question has been settled forever, but that dramatic claims require reliable evidence and should not be treated as fact when results remain weak or inconsistent. Menstrual cycles are also close in length to lunar months, but similarity in timing does not prove that the moon regulates every person's reproductive biology. Human bodies vary, cycles vary, and biological processes are influenced by many factors. Ancient observers noticed resemblance and built meaning around it, just as they connected red color with blood or darkness with danger. Modern science asks whether the connection remains when memory, expectation, coincidence, and selective reporting are controlled. Often, the apparent influence becomes smaller or disappears. The moon has a measurable relationship with Earth through the exchange of rotational energy within the Earth-Moon system. Over immense time, tidal interactions have gradually altered Earth's rotation and pushed the moon farther away. Scientists study how this relationship may have affected ancient day length and the history of tides, but it would be misleading to turn that complexity into the claim that the moon designed human evolution. Our species emerged through a vast network of biological and environmental changes. The moon formed part of the planetary setting, not a hidden guide directing human destiny. Its real power requires no exaggeration. It moves oceans, shapes rhythms along coasts, lights portions of the night, and preserves evidence from the early solar system. Its imagined power reveals something. People often prefer a personal influence to an impersonal process. The moon did not control our ancestors, but their need to interpret it helped shape calendars, stories, rituals, and institutions. What science removes is not wonder. It removes unsupported certainty, leaving a world whose genuine connections are more precise, limited, and more remarkable than the warnings once placed upon it. Across the 7 warnings, the moon never changed its intention because it had no intention to change. What changed was the human world beneath it. In Mesopotamia, an eclipse threatened the king because the ruler represented the continuity of the state. In ancient China, a darkened moon could be read as a disturbance within political and moral order. In South Asian traditions, obstruction became a story of pursuit, temporary darkness, and return. In Sicily, the same shadow entered military judgment and helped delay an army already close to collapse. Among the Maya, eclipse intervals were calculated and placed inside sacred time. In Mesoamerican beliefs around pregnancy, celestial disturbance was carried into fears about the vulnerable body and the next generation. In the language of a blood-colored moon, human violence and judgment were projected into the sky. These traditions differed greatly, yet each warning gathered around something people feared losing. A ruler could die, a dynasty could fail, an army could be trapped, a calendar could lose authority, a pregnancy could end badly, a community could face war, hunger, or disorder. The moon became important because it offered one visible surface upon which these different fears could be placed. This pattern reaches back toward the origins of human life, when survival depended on identifying danger before it became unavoidable. A broken branch, an unfamiliar sound, or a change in weather could carry useful information. The mind that noticed such signs helped protect the body and the group. But the same ability could create false connections when 2 events appeared together without sharing a cause. An eclipse near the death of a ruler could become an omen, A red moon before battle could become a warning. A healthy birth after a protective ritual could become proof that the ritual had worked. Memory preserved the dramatic coincidence and forgot the many times nothing followed. Institutions then gave these connections longer lives. Priests copied them, courts recorded them, families repeated them, and rulers acted upon them. A belief no longer depended on one frightened observer. It could become part of law, ceremony, education, and collective identity. This is why the 7 warnings cannot be dismissed as simple mistakes. Their physical claims were unsupported, but their historical consequences were real. People changed plans, performed rituals, delayed movement, assigned blame, protected authority, and organized calendars because of what they believed the moon meant. The object in the sky remained distant, but interpretation moved through bodies and institutions. The warnings also reveal that fear often chooses the most valuable thing available. It does not attach itself randomly. It gathers around kings because political stability matters, around crops because hunger matters, around pregnancy because continuity matters, and around war because survival matters. The sky becomes a mirror for whatever a society cannot afford to lose. Modern science changes this relationship by asking whether the sign and the feared event are physically connected. When no mechanism, repeated evidence, or reliable prediction supports the connection, the warning must be treated as cultural history rather than natural fact. This does not strip the past of meaning. It allows meaning to be understood without repeating its errors. Recognizing this pattern does not make modern people immune to it. We still treat vivid events as more meaningful than quiet evidence, especially when control feels weak. A coincidence can travel, gain authority through repetition, and become difficult to question once it protects identity or offers comfort. The ancient warnings remain useful because they reveal this process in form. They show how observation becomes interpretation, interpretation becomes custom, and custom can eventually appear as truth. The common thread among all 7 warnings is therefore not lunar power, but human vulnerability. People looked upward during moments of uncertainty and saw their own political structures, bodies, memories, and hopes reflected back. The moon was not speaking. Humanity was listening to the echo of its own fear. The value of these ancient warnings does not lie in repeating them as truth. It lies in understanding how human knowledge changes when observation becomes more careful than fear. Every warning began with something real. A darkened moon, a changing color, a repeated cycle, or an unexpected interruption in familiar light. The era entered when people moved from seeing an event to assigning it a human purpose. A shadow became judgment. A color became blood. A coincidence became prediction. The educational lesson is not that earlier societies were incapable of thought. They observed patiently, preserved records, built calendars, developed mathematics, and passed knowledge across generations. Their mistake was the same mistake modern people can still make, allowing a meaningful story to feel more convincing than a tested explanation. Science offers a different discipline. It asks whether an idea can be measured, compared, repeated, and corrected. It does not demand that uncertainty disappear before inquiry begins. It requires that uncertainty remain visible. When evidence is incomplete, the honest answer is not a dramatic claim. It is a careful description of what is known, what remains uncertain, and what kind of observation could change the conclusion. This habit is one of humanity's most valuable inheritances. Our earliest ancestors survived by learning from experience, but later generations discovered that memory alone can preserve error. Written records allowed observations to be compared. Mathematics allowed cycles to be tested. Instruments revealed details the eye could not see. Shared criticism allowed one explanation to replace another, without requiring the universe itself to change. The moon remained where it was while human understanding moved. That movement was not a loss of wonder. It was a change in the source of wonder. An eclipse became more remarkable when people understood that it could be predicted through motion and shadow. The red moon became more meaningful when its color revealed sunlight passing through Earth's atmosphere. Lunar scars became more powerful when they were recognized as evidence of impacts older than humanity. Scientific explanation did not make the moon smaller. It placed it inside a history deeper than myth. The same approach protects people from harm. When a celestial event is blamed for illness, pregnancy outcomes, violence, or political collapse, attention can be pulled away from causes that can actually be studied and addressed. Fear directed toward the moon cannot improve medical care, prevent war, or correct failed government. Evidence can guide action toward nutrition, infection, policy, planning, and human responsibility. This is why separating symbol from cause is not merely an intellectual exercise. It changes where compassion, effort, and accountability are placed. The ancient warnings remain valuable as cultural records because they show what communities feared and what they tried to protect. They become dangerous only when their symbolic meanings are presented as physical facts. A respectful understanding can hold both truths at once. The beliefs were sincere, and the moon did not produce the events attached to them. Education begins in that balance. It does not mock the past, and it does not surrender to it. It listens, compares, tests, and keeps the right to revise. Across many generations, humanity learned that the sky does not need to speak for us to learn from it. Its silence can teach patience. Its regularity can teach measurement. Its apparent disturbances can teach us to question the first meaning that enters the mind. The most important warning, then, may not concern kings, armies, eclipses, blood, or birth. It concerns the moment when certainty arrives before evidence. In that moment, an old survival instinct can become a modern error. The answer is not to stop searching for meaning, but to build meaning upon what the world can support. The moon offers no moral command, yet it gives humanity a quiet opportunity to look upward, feel wonder, and still remain honest about what the light can truly tell us with patience and humility. The moon has remained above every human generation, but no generation has looked at it through exactly the same world. Early hunters saw a changing light above dark ground. Priests saw a calendar and a sacred rhythm. Kings saw danger to authority. Families saw protection or threat around birth. Commanders saw permission to move or a reason to wait. Astronomers saw cycles, shadows, mountains, craters, and eventually a world shaped by collisions older than life. The moon did not pass through these identities. Humanity did. Each age carried its own fears upward and received them back as meaning. The 7 ancient warnings now appear less like messages sent from the sky, and more like records of what civilizations could not bear to lose. A ruler feared the end of order. A court feared failure. A community feared darkness without explanation. An army feared movement at the wrong moment. Specialists feared intervals when the heavens might appear unstable. Families feared harm to the unborn. Writers feared war and judgment so deeply that they placed the colour of blood upon the moon. These fears were real even when the celestial causes imagined behind them were not. They shaped rituals, archives, decisions, blame, memory, and power. The educational value lies in learning to preserve the humanity of those responses without preserving their errors. Ancient observers were not empty minds waiting for modern knowledge. They watched carefully with the tools, language, and institutions available to them. Their records helped later generations notice recurrence, improve calculation, and separate coincidence from cause. Knowledge grew because people kept looking, comparing, doubting, and correcting. The path was uneven, and it remains unfinished. Scientists now understand lunar phases, eclipses, reflected sunlight, surface geology, tides, and much of the moon's history. Yet questions remain about details of its formation, its interior, the distribution of water, and the long evolution of the Earth-Moon system. These unanswered questions do not reopen every discarded belief. Uncertainty is not an empty space where any story becomes true. It is a boundary that invites better evidence. This may be the most useful lesson the moon offers. Human beings do not need absolute certainty in order to be honest. We can admit what is unknown without filling the silence with fear. We can value myth as cultural memory without mistaking it for astronomy. We can respect ritual as evidence of human care without treating it as medicine. We can recognize that a belief changed history without claiming that the belief described nature correctly. The moon then becomes more than an object once feared or worshipped. It becomes a mirror for the development of thought itself. Its surface preserves impacts, While human history preserves interpretations, one archive is written in stone. The other is written in tablets, chronicles, manuscripts, customs, and stories. Both contain damage, revision, and survival. Near the beginning of our species, looking upward helped people orient themselves within darkness. Today, the same act can orient us within knowledge. We no longer need to hear a warning in every shadow, yet we still need humility when a familiar world appears strange. The moon was not what earlier generations thought it was, and our present understanding may also be revised as evidence improves. Revision is not failure, it is how knowledge remains alive. Perhaps they will notice that even after spacecraft and samples, we continue to use the moon as a surface for longing, danger, identity, and hope. Our instruments became stronger, but the ancient habit of projection did not vanish. It simply learned new language, reminding us that better technology does not automatically create better human judgment. The old warnings asked whether the sky intended to punish, protect, or command us. A quieter question now remains. When future generations look back at the moon we described, measured, visited, and imagined, what will they discover about the limits we could not yet see in ourselves?